Hello everyone and welcome to another session of AP Human Geography with Mr. Elrod. Today we are starting a new unit, Unit 4. Probably one of the more, I don't know, I would say interesting units, but definitely one of the units that we see on a more regular basis, especially in our news and things like that. It's really a dynamic unit as it comes to discussing the political organizations of the world. So we're Unit 4, political geography, or the political organizations of space. Oh, and by the way, I hope you enjoyed the new intro music. So as we look at our new unit, political organization of space, it's really important to understand the world prior to the world we live in today. Prior to World War II and just before World War II, really the world was organized in the way that you see on the map. So maybe pause the video, study it for a second, and look at maybe some of the names of either countries or territories that you don't recognize. Look at some that you do recognize. You notice that a lot of the European countries are still there, but even still, you have places like Austria-Hungary was still a kingdom or an empire. You had the Kingdom of Sweden. Here, you have most of Africa is carved up into colonial territories, things like that. But again, this is the way the world worked, and this is the way the world was organized. It was primarily organized into colonial empires, and that's the way the world was structured. And of course, this is the world that we have today. And I apologize, you can't read all the names on the map, but it's the world that you're familiar with. It's the world of the nation state, the world that's organized into these independent and autonomous countries that divide up the world, and you have, for the most part, pretty much all across the world, you have elections and you have governments and things along those lines. This is a fairly new way of structuring the world. It's a fairly new way of people organizing themselves and interacting with the political process as a part of their country. And so the world that we live in, politically speaking, is a brand new world, and it's one that we're still kind of trying to figure out. At least a lot of countries around the world are trying to figure out how they fit in it and how they should organize themselves. And of course, one of the most recent countries here, the country of Sudan. Scotland just tried to break away from the United Kingdom. That was not overly successful. But again, just understanding that 1900 we were here, 2014 we are now here, and it's constantly changing and evolving, and the dynamics between countries is changing and evolving. So it's important to understand this is a very dynamic topic to talk about, as it's continually changing and moving and shifting. Now, one new feature that I've added to my videos is going to be the quiz ferret. When you see the quiz ferret arrive, he will bring you a quiz question when you can pause the video and answer the question for yourself to kind of check your understanding and knowledge. My wife asked me why a ferret, and my answer to her was, why not? He's popping out of the ground, he's kind of cute looking, and I thought it'd just be fun to have. And I'm gonna have to find some kind of intro music for him as we see him and go, quiz ferret, quiz ferret. All right. So anyway, moving on with the material. So when we look at political geography, the first thing that we'll begin to see is that political geography in our world today is going to be based upon political boundaries. And there's a couple things we have to understand and recognize about political boundaries, because it is the way that we divide up our world. It's the way that we understand the political organization of space. We have to understand that political boundaries are not anything that are natural. Political boundaries are not a part of the natural physical landscape. In fact, other than physical features, which you can incorporate into political boundaries, there is no division of the landscape. These political boundaries are 100% man-made, and we use them to try and organize the political landscape. And you have to understand why that's important, so that people can understand what territory they're a part of, what government they pay taxes to, what natural resources are allocated to each country, how countries are supposed to relate to each other in terms of their borders and their boundaries. So political boundaries are really important because the acquisition of land is really important, and the relationships that countries and people have between each other are really important. So I just have two examples of some interesting man-made political boundaries. This one here to the right, this is the boundary between the United States and Canada. As you can see, just a nice strip through the forest to indicate where the boundary is at. This, of course, is the 38th parallel in between North and South Korea, very heavily armed and guarded. and not exactly the friendliest of all boundaries. And another interesting thing to say is you see the stark contrast between this boundary between the United States and Canada and this boundary between South Korea and North Korea. Clearly administered in different ways, and shows you kind of the differing relationships that these two countries have, or I guess these four countries have with each other. When we talk about political geography, what we're discussing is we're looking at the study of human political organizations and the way that humans organize themselves across the world uh, in a political manner. We can look at that in a couple of different ways. We can look at the way that they organize the land that they're a part of. How do they break that down? In the United States, we have the country, and then we have states, and then each state is broken down into several counties. In other parts of the world, you might have the country, and then provinces or territories, or however they divide it up, and then, of course, the way that that is administered. Then you also have the study of the different political organizations that are a part of the country and the governance of the country. The way that that is organized. You can look at the types of parties that they have. It's a party system. Is it a parliamentary system? Is it a monarchy? Is it a theocracy? Is it a communist dictatorship? All these types of things, and that's going to impact the way that people interact with each other, the way the government interacts with the people, and also the way that the land is administered. You can also look at the political structure. When I'm talking about political structure, I mean more along the lines of the interaction between the national government and the local governments. How exactly is that organized? Is it more unitary? Is it more federal, confederal? And again, it's really going to depend on what country you're looking at. One thing that's really important to understand in political geography, maybe more so than anything else, is each country, each place is really going to have its own means of setting itself up, establishing its government, and the way that it's going to work. Even within the United States and all the 50 states that we have and all the different counties, all the different cities, they organize themselves differently, and they don't all play by the same rules. And so you have so many different cases of study in terms of how that particular government is structured and the way that it runs. So it's really important to understand that we'll talk generally, but if you're going to get specific, you really have to take things on kind of a case by case basis. When we study political geography, we can look at three different scales of inquiry. There's that phrase from early back in Unit 1. You have the above country scale, which is international political geography, so looking at international relationships between countries, and those are really interesting, especially when you begin to look at the different goals that countries have for themselves and then for the international community. The United States and China just signed an agreement that has to do with carbon emissions, and you wouldn't think that the United States and China would be great partners. In fact, we're kind of at odds with China over some of their moves in the South China Sea. But we're important. They're an important trade partner for us, and so it's definitely an interesting relationship there. Our relationship with Russia over recent years, especially with Syria, the United States feeling like something should be done in Syria, but we are having a hard time through international channels, especially the United Nations, because Russia holds a veto on the UN Security Council. And so, those are some really interesting situations to look at. You think about supranationalism. I have over here the flag of the European Union. Almost this move for countries to give up some of their individual rights and sovereignty to lose themselves into the collective. But then, even as they move towards that, we see kind of a push away from it. So it's kind of almost going in two directions at once. Kind of interesting. Look at the at country level. So talking about the national scale, which is why I have the American flag here. How does and this was I mentioned this earlier, but at the at country level, how does the national government interact with all of the state or the local governments? How do the people interact with the national government? How is the country going to carry itself and interact with the people in its country and deal with its own internal issues and those kinds of things? And then, of course, the below country scale, looking at the local level, and I have the map here of Georgia. Teaching in Georgia, living in Georgia, I felt like this was most appropriate. So you look at the way that the state is divided up. You can look at the relationship between uh, people within the states, the counties within the states. Right now, there's actually a move for creation of a new city within the county that I'm in, creation of city in and around Atlanta to try to break away from some of these counties that maybe you've heard of on the news or relatively corrupt, those types of things. So again, all different levels of study, and they're all going to bring their own dynamics in terms of things that are going to influence the way that people interact with each other and they interact over their space. Now, when we look at political geography, what we have to understand is all this idea of boundaries and political boundaries and things like that. It's really going to be based upon this concept of human territoriality, where humans are looking to overtake and define their ownership of land. And so the ownership of land is going to be based upon a defined space that they're going to be able to control. Now, what's really important to understand is this idea of human territoriality is going to change over time and over space. So when we talk about human territoriality, especially when it comes to political geography, as we move throughout time and as we move across space, these ideas of land ownership, government control of land, individual ownership of land is going to change, and it's going to change based upon it can change based upon development. It can change based upon the strength of the government. It can change based upon culture. I have two pictures here. This bottom picture is to represent, well, it is Mongolian nomads and their understanding of human ownership of land and the way that land should be broken down and kept and organized, whether it be politically or not, is going to be different than these developers up here. And as far as their understanding of who gets to own land, how you go about owning land, purchasing land, what you're supposed to do with land. These are going to be two completely different, two completely opposing concepts and ideas over the idea of human territoriality and the ability to own, purchase land, control land, those types of things. Now, a lot of this idea of human territoriality is going to be based on this idea of personal space. You know, how much space do we require, and what are our ideas on our personal ownership space? And this also is going to vary based on time. It's going to be vary based on space. As you move across time, as you move across space, people are going to have different ideas on personal ownership of land. How does that relate to the government? What kind of control can you have over land? What should you use the land for? So just two different examples I have here. Obviously, someone who lives in a large city versus someone who lives in the country they're gonna have two completely different concepts of what personal space is like, what the purpose of land is, of the ownership of land, the cost of land, all those types of things are going to be completely different. And so, uh, this idea of personal space and human territoriality helps us to understand this whole concept of political organization of space in terms of human territoriality and ownership of land. And so, again, that is kind of the basics of political geography, the idea of the control of land, the ownership of land, using borders to define that, and human territoriality and control of that. And that helps us to separate ourselves from the other people that are around, and whether they live in a different county, different state, different country. That still helps us to organize a space. And again, as I've said many times throughout the year, organization of the world for humans is really important. It helps us to better interact with the world that we live in. So that's all we're going to do for right now. When we come back next time, we'll be looking at some of the basic concepts in political geography and some of the basic vocabulary that we need in order to study political geography.